When you look up a job description of a staff scheduler or staffing coordinator, you can easily find lists of duties that include bullets like determine staff needs, create work schedules, prepare staffing reports, and manage staff callouts and vacation coverage. Without context, this seems straightforward. But, in our experience, schedulers who support the approximately 83 million hourly wage employees in the US rarely do only what's in their list of duties. Many times, scheduling is merely an administrative task that is part of a larger responsibility. Nurse schedulers are mostly providing patient care. Hotel and hospitality managers need to keep guests happy. Manufacturing and logistics managers need to consider operations and payroll. The list goes on and on. So, what are the secret lives of schedulers like? In today's Breadcrumbs, let's look at how this role has changed over the years, how workers' expectations have evolved, and what you can do to make sure your organization is flexible. Hello, and welcome to Breadcrumbs, the podcast from WorkSync. Today, we're talking about scheduling and the people who have to get it done. I'm joined by a veteran of our show, Joe Thompson, WorkSync's product manager, and a newcomer, Harry Monahan III, our business consultant. Welcome, and thanks for being here, you two.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me back, Kim.
Why don't we start with talking about your experience working with people who schedule hourly employees?
Well, Joe and I have been doing this for pretty much our entire adult lives. There's 40 years of experience between both of us. We've been through hundreds of implementations. We've supported thousands of clients. I've been through 4 time and scheduling solutions over the past 20 years. And we've worked with a lot of scheduling platforms as well as folks that are doing things in Excel. Joe, what about you?
What you said.
Yeah.
No, going on 22 years in this business, and worked directly with clients and implementations for 13 of those years before moving to product. So definitely spent a lot of time in the field dealing with organizations. What I would say, trying to be there for schedulers was probably one of the most difficult challenges there is in an organization that's driven around variable hourly employees, people that are working different shifts, and it's not just 9 to 5 for everybody.
Yeah, so you both have seen people in action doing this job. So, Joe, you kind of alluded to working with organizations. What have you guys seen as a typical practice of scheduling within an organization?
Well, I think that there's fundamentally 2 ways to go about it. I think there's people, and it depends on industry, but there's folks that would do something that we would call roster scheduling, right? And it's the idea that there are shifts and people need to be assigned to them. However, in many industries, and healthcare and hospitality are 2 examples that you mentioned, Kim, I think those are examples of groups that can't do that. They're more dynamic, they're predictive, and they have a requirement you mentioned earlier. They either make guests happy, they take care of patients, they're charged with keeping their organization inside of a budget or monetary amount tied to a grant. And now what we need to do is we need to move people into those scheduling positions to make that happen. And I would say the most popular scheduling tool in America probably still is Excel. Joe, I know we've run into that plenty over the last 20 years.
Yeah, what we do find in any environment is the scheduler is the one person hardly anyone is ever happy with. The people that they have to schedule anyway. Everyone's got their own needs. The more flexible and variable the workforce is, the younger the workforce is, the more pressure that goes on anyone that's performing a scheduling role in any given organization. Industry by industry, it changes. In some areas like healthcare, this requires people that are that have certain certifications, right? Only certain people can do certain jobs. And there's variations of that. The more certified the work is. If you think about an RN versus scheduling for a quick serve for a fast food restaurant, there is less flexibility in healthcare and what jobs people can do or are willing to do compared to other industries. So it varies in the experience that we've seen. When Harry talks about roster scheduling, that's not responsive to the needs of an organization necessarily. If they fluctuate day to day, it's really hard to build a permanent roster off of that. It's impossible. So it definitely does require someone who's flexible and with very fast critical thinking skills to deal with some of that. That is really good with people, but knows they're never going to make everyone happy. It's a position of great compromise that requires a lot of good communication skill as well. So we've in my experience of implementing HCM solutions, most specifically time and labor, they all have, I would say, the most unique needs organization by organization, because it varies by industry, varies by organizational culture. Scheduling how people get to come to work can be one of the most contentious things that any organization has to deal with.
So we are seeing this practice of scheduling being really responsive to people's needs, and people who aren't really equipped with any automations doing this role in some of these big organizations. But I know the role has evolved as technology has as well. Can you talk a little bit about any big fundamental changes you've seen in this role over the years?
Well, certainly the more software solutions have enabled schedulers to more efficiently grab the resource in question, which is humans, putting them on a schedule. There have been some improvements to see the big picture, and more importantly, to connect business need to what that schedule looks like. It's a little bit less of a guessing game, industry dependent. It fluctuates in known ways, but then you still have the people element, which is the biggest that they have to deal with in this space. You also have a lot of question around who's responsible for it. So when we get to more than one person responsible for scheduling that can come after the same set of resources, if you think two store managers and they're both in the same town and can pick from the same list of employees, generally organizations try to avoid that. But there's definitely behavioral health scenarios where homes can share pooled resources of employees. And there are definitely scenarios where it's not acceptable to only have two instead of three people working, where there's mandates by the state or municipality or federal mandates about how many people need to be working at a given moment based on the needs of the organization. You do find with the greater technology, there's a greater chance for collaboration on dealing with shared resources, but it also becomes something that schedulers have to be good at. They have to be good at working with other people and making those compromises, making those arrangements, making those deals. It's also becoming more empowering for the employee in a lot of levels.
I think another fundamental change is that it seems like, and maybe this is just recent memory, seeming like it's always or hasn't always been true, but just this unprecedented labor shortage, right? I can't think of how many conversations I've had recently where folks really do need tools, but it almost takes a back seat to, well, hey, can your software help me find people? Why do I need it to enhance a tool that's designed to arrange people and to organize people to fulfill ultimately business goals and challenges when I don't have any people to move around? My W-2 pool of people is empty. And that's something that seems like has changed quite a bit.
Yeah, and the stakes are pretty high. The role of a scheduler is critical to business operations, basic function, and it's a job that's often overlooked. So we've been talking a little about the industry and organizations, but let's talk about the individual. Harry, you mentioned this labor shortage. It creates power for the individual worker. Those expectations have evolved, especially in the past couple years. In a recent survey, 64 respondents said that flexible schedule above paycheck was the most important thing to a job seeker. Can you talk a little bit more about this?
I would say fundamentally, defining flexibility would be important, right? It is pretty difficult for that to be marketed to folks that are job seekers. You know, for example, I need to leave early on Friday to catch my daughter's soccer game. I don't know how much the employees care if they have to pick up a phone and call their manager versus opening up some fancy scheduling app to go in and do it themselves. But what the scheduling app does do is it removes entirely the administrative burden and the manual process associated with somebody picking up a phone and making a phone call. So there's a huge value for the organization versus, you know, if we give the employee the boundaries on their smartphone to go in and say, this is what you guys can and can't take care of yourself. The organization is going to benefit significantly from giving those employees the path to do that. And I think a lot of employees will value that, right? Not having to pick up the phone in the first place. They can log right into an app and take care of it themselves.
And it definitely alleviates a portion of the daily grind from the schedulers themselves. If employees are left to solve their own problems, it becomes less of the burden on those that would otherwise have to solve and negotiate solutions to those problems without the employee. Rather than just calling in, you know, I can offer up my shift for other people to work. I know I'm not going to be in tomorrow. If something's come up, see if I can solve this problem before anyone else has to. It both alleviates the pressure on the scheduler and gives the employee more agency in their work life. And in today's culture, that's becoming more and more important, that people have that agency to try to direct what their work and home life balance is going to be, when it's going to be, when they have an opportunity to pick up shifts, when they don't, when they would prefer not to. Empowering the employee and giving them that is the flexibility that they're seeking.
And all things being equal, and if an employee is evaluating two different employers, and one has all of those things Joe just mentioned, and the other has pick up the phone and an Excel spreadsheet, you know, which do you think they're going to choose? We've heard a lot of thought leadership, especially in HR tech, talk about software vendors moving into an experience space. Experience is important. And I think the one Joe just laid out is certainly the one that employees are going to choose to go with.
Right. So giving employees power and really taking that or reducing the burden for the scheduler, I think, is a way to create the experience that we're talking about. Are there any examples that you've heard of companies that have implemented these self-scheduling practices that have seen success?
I think a couple 2 or 3 years ago, Joe and I were tasked internally with going out and gathering requirements from clients across the board. And several of the stops, especially in healthcare, and I remember a couple of large hospitals that we sat down with, went through a very elaborate workflow of how they implement self-scheduling. And for them, it was very important that the appropriate groups of people had visibility to the schedules at the right time. And it sort of introduced this idea that scheduling moves through phases or stages. And it was important that a certain group get access to it first, and then it moved down to maybe part-timers, and then finally out to agency employees. And I just remember thinking to myself, how would you do this without a system? And yet they were doing it. And so really, I think we have seen some really good examples of it. But boy, it's an awful lot of rules and structure. You know, Joe, I think you shared one with me recently about, was it a car moving company?
Yeah, it's funny. Why do you need a company to move cars? Well, in some areas of the country, that's a real popular thing to do because they put them together and then need to get them to a certain place. And so that was very much a self-scheduling environment. They had a lot of people that, from young to retirees that are picking up shifts when they can to basically just drive the vehicles where they need to be to get them moving. So it's a mission critical thing. They got to get on car carriers. They got to get on trains. They have to end up in the right place. It's a job that's got to get done, but they have enough workforce that's interested in doing that part-time work, or park them until the chips come in, with the current logistical problems that we have. So there's even more moving to do. Where do you park it for a year while you're waiting for that? So there are definitely organizations that have tried to get away with full employee self-scheduling. And if they build a culture around that and they're able to get most of the scheduling done that way, you're a lot less likely for employees to last minute say, I really didn't want to work that shift, try to get rid of it, can't get rid of it, end up calling in. Now it's your scheduler's problem. And that's what that empowerment can change. If people like what they're doing earlier, they're less likely to cause trouble downstream for an organization that's trying to run efficiently. Now, things definitely happen. And that daily grind is never ending for the scheduler, dealing with those who've called in, who at the last minute, car broke down, can't make it to work, got sick, kid got sick. Things happen in life. But the more that you can minimize that on those that are doing the scheduling, the more flexible and available they are. And some schedulers, that's not their only job. You think about like a long-term care home, often a scheduler is also working with the residents. They're often an RN that's also tasked with that duty. And so the less time that takes, the more productive they can be in other more meaningful areas of their organization. So self-scheduling has definitely been, with the rise of smartphones and apps, has definitely become a lot easier to accomplish. And so it's become a good differentiator for organizations to be able to offer that to employees. And in a tight market for getting labor, you want all those differentiators you can get.
All right. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the rise in temp staffing agencies. How is scheduling with these types of employees different than scheduling with full-time or full shift employees?
It can definitely be in any given organization politically fraught. Especially in healthcare, we've seen a huge rise of this in healthcare, where employees will leave their employer because of that lack of flexibility, sign up for the temp agency that's going to lease them back to their employer for a nice premium of however many times what they were paying them and wouldn't be flexible about before. But then that puts the employee in a position to pick up shifts. This isn't a suggestion to all the RNs out there. They need you. But if this is, this has been happening more and more. It's been a major trend. It was the American Hospital Association sends a letter to Congress saying we've got to find a way to stop this, especially in the midst of the pandemic. American Hospital Association or Hospital Administrators Association, something like that. I have to look it up later. I just remembered that. But yeah, they drafted a letter to Congress and they're like, this is killing us. We can't keep going on like this. But the reason that employees are coming from staffing agencies is it gives them maximal flexibility, right? Staffing agencies generally don't require how much an employee is going to work. Some want some minimum amount of it, but generally the staffing agency is never in a position to tell the employee, you must now work that shift. So it's a position of maximum flexibility. When it comes to the employer side, they want to make sure that the employees they want to keep happy are the ones they already have. They're W-2 employees. They're not trying to keep the temps happy. Keep the W-2 employees happy before they become temps. So they want to make sure their scheduling needs are handled first. And it's definitely, anecdotal from my perspective. But the tougher an organization is on employees about scheduling by saying, you can't just trade off your shift the day before. You need to call me and tell me why it's acceptable. Organizations like that definitely see a faster uptake of employees leaving and having to rely on staffing agencies. But make sure you take care of those employees first. Give them all the opportunity in the world to have the shifts that make them happy before employers start bringing in staffing agencies. But some of these questions, like who's going to work a third shift at a nursing home on a Friday night, have to have an answer. The answer can't be nobody. There are a lot of spaces that we deal with in healthcare, especially, where it's not optional. We have to have someone here. And so the temp agencies definitely fill in those gaps when they present themselves.
Yeah, and there's some other challenges too that time and scheduling providers specifically have had to deal with, right? Because there used to be the old trick, and Joe, I know you've done this, and I've done it as well. And that is, you're utilizing this agency pool of labor at whether it's a healthcare facility or not, and all of these things, for the most part, let's face it, are billed on a PEPM, right? A per employee type model. So the more people you bring in, the more different people you bring in, the higher your bill is for that software platform. And that's just something that we've all had to deal with as software providers. So one of the strategies that was implemented for a lot of years was, well, when we get to the scheduler, what we'll do is we'll take this block, that third shift on a Friday night, that thing Joe just said we didn't have an answer to, and we would just pencil it in for agency worker 1. We wouldn't say that it was Joe or Harry, because tomorrow it might be Joe, Tuesday might be Harry. And so that revolving door of people coming in and out, that was a way that we could accommodate to say this position is being filled by an agency worker, and now we would only be charged for one person. But now we've seen even regulation come in and make this more difficult for schedulers in the agency world, right? Because now we have things like payroll-based journal, where we just can't say it's agency worker 1. We need to know that it was Harry on Friday and Joe on Tuesday. And so there's a lot of things that touches, right? Because now even scheduling and time vendors who are always used to just receiving employees from a payroll company, right? That's the system of record. That's where we get all of our information. Not anymore, right? We can't just have agency worker 1, which means we need to go get demographic information potentially directly from the staffing agency. So there's a lot of things, a lot of layers to this, a lot of things that are a lot more complicated than they used to be. That's for sure.
Yeah, the temporary staffing comes in when you have a commitment, and I live in a small town, and from time to time in the last couple of years, a local restaurant posts on the town Facebook group, we're not going to be open tonight, staffing issues. If you can't say that, you might need a staffing agency at that point.
All right, so we like to end every episode with your top 3 breadcrumbs, takeaways from our episode. Joe, you want to start?
I might start with find a system, whether it's a really great Microsoft Excel system or something a little more complex than that. Find a system where everyone can participate and engage in the scheduling process. That's a stakeholder in it. Engage the employees, give them some insight, give them control over their own lives. They want that from a work-life balance perspective to if you let them solve their own problems at the last minute, you don't have to perspective, and have the empathy for the schedulers. I mean, there's a lot of capability that I've seen in our products where people say, yeah, but I don't want it to be that easy. I want to make it hard for someone. As if being punitive towards the employee who's trying to call in sick or making it tougher for them will discourage them from doing it in the first place. How many people are calling in sick to their manager via text message? It's not like you're remotely confirming their illness or their position. It's prioritize making people happy and keeping them engaged over making them pay for inconveniencing you. I mean, this is not the market for This is not the market to let employees know that you're a hard ass. This isn't the market for letting employees know that you're not going to stand for them calling in. But yeah, I would replace that first point with it's more get some way for everyone to participate. Second point, be engaging and let them solve their own problems. And the third point is to have the empathy, not just for the scheduler, but for the employees. And to say you want to bang things out in this labor market and do a good job. You want to, whatever you're doing, taking care of people, producing parts, whatever it is you're trying to do in life, be good to the people that you're trying to get to help you do it. This is the market for that. This is the market for being good to people.
Yeah, I think it's changed for sure. I mean, you don't, your boss is not in the White Castle tower doling out orders anymore. There's a little more balance. I honestly think one of the best points to take away is, be a good employer, be a good person. And it starts with just having that empathy, creating flexibility, engaging your employees. Be a good employer, care about your workers. Personally, I think that gets you pretty far.
And scheduling is one of the biggest places where you can demonstrate or fail at that.
Mm-hmm. Harry, what do you think? Any last words you want to impart for this audience?
Yeah, so to add on to what Joe was saying, finding a process that everybody can fit into and that every stakeholder is able to participate in, whether it's a Microsoft product or a modern scheduling tool, that is something to be focused on. Just to reiterate what we've already talked about a little bit, almost every vendor in the enterprise space now is focused on experience. And so that should be something that you're focusing on. What is your employee experience like for scheduling? If it's a bad one, they're probably not going to use it. And obviously that's going to needlessly make the lives of your schedulers more difficult. So focusing on a good employee experience, whatever direction you choose to go, I think will be helpful for all.
Okay. Well, thank you both for being here. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Harry. Very insightful. Really appreciate it and hope to see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kim.